Welcome. If you're lying in bed right now, as heavy, mind still racing, you're in the right place. Long ago, in the quiet hills of medieval Scotland, life moved slowly. The wind rolled softly over the grass, sheep wandered across the fields, and stone cottages sat still under cloudy skies. It was a land of mist, mud, and a lot of time to think. In these old days, people didn't have phones, clocks, or noisy machines. They had the sun, the seasons, and their feet. Days were spent farming, cooking, building, and trying to stay warm. Life was hard, but not fast. It was the kind of life where small things stood out. A song, a warm fire, or maybe a game. Games have been part of life for a long, long time. Even when times were tough, people still found time to play. Not because they were lazy, but because fun helps people get through hard work. And in many parts of Europe, one kind of game kept popping up again and again. A game with a stick and a ball. In France, there was a game called pal-mail, where people would knock balls through hoops. In the Netherlands, folks played Calvin, hitting a ball toward a target. There were other names too, like shinty or hurling, each a little different, but they all had the same idea: ball, stick, swing. Nobody really knows when or where the idea started. Maybe someone just picked up a stick and whacked a rock for fun. Or maybe they were aiming at a tree stump on purpose. But somehow, across muddy villages and grassy fields, this idea spread. Then came Scotland. In some lonely part of the countryside, near the coast or maybe a village, people began to play a game that looked a lot like golf. They called it golf. They'd swing sticks at small leather balls and try to send them across the field, not just anywhere, but toward a goal. Maybe a hole. Maybe a marker. Nobody wrote it down exactly, but we know it happened. At first, it wasn't a sport. It was just something people did when chores were done. You'd finish fixing the roof, then meet your neighbor in the field. You'd grab a bent stick, maybe carved from a tree root, and chase a ball across the grass. It wasn't about winning. It was just something to do. Quiet fun. The land helped shape the game. Scotland isn't flat. It's full of bumps, hills, rocks, and wild grass. So when someone swung a ball across the land, they had to work with what they had. A hill might help or hurt. A patch of mud might slow things down. Every field was its own little course. There were no uniforms, no teams, just a couple people, maybe 3 or 4, laughing softly and swinging their sticks. If the ball got lost in a puddle or stuck in a sheep's footprint, well, that was part of the fun. Nobody rushed. Nobody shouted. It was a quiet game in a quiet land. And soon people noticed. The game began to appear near towns and castles. Even soldiers liked it, maybe because it felt like training, or maybe because it helped pass the time between battles. There were no clubs or leagues, just people playing the same game, their own way, wherever there was space. But not everyone was pleased. Some leaders looked at this peaceful game and saw a problem. They didn't like that people were playing with sticks and balls when they were supposed to be practicing archery or working. In a land often at war, every man was expected to learn the bow. And if too many men were swinging clubs instead of arrows, well, that was a concern. Still, the game didn't stop. It moved quietly from village to village, from field to alley, from farmer to noble. It didn't need money or rules or judges. It just needed a ball, a stick, and some space. And slowly, golf became more than a way to pass time. It became part of the land, part of the people. It's strange to think that something so simple, just hitting a ball with a stick, could become something people cared about. But that's how things often begin. With a quiet moment. With a little fun. With a soft thwack of leather onward under a gray sky. Nobody knew then that this game would one day spread across the world. Nobody imagined green lawns, golf carts, or famous players. Back then, it was just another way to enjoy the land, calmly, slowly, and together. So that's where our story begins. In a field, in the wind, with a game that didn't need permission, just time, and a little curiosity. That game, of course, was golf. Dancing and chessboards carved from ivory. Leisure wasn't for everyone, mostly just the rich, but it still found its place. Below them, in the towns and fields, commoners worked, sun up to sundown, farming, brewing, fixing, carrying, cutting wood, hauling fish. They didn't have feasts or tournaments, but every now and then, when the chores were done and the animals fed, they had time for play. It didn't look fancy. A few friends, a bit of space, a game made up on the spot. Some played dice games. Some threw stones at targets. Some kicked inflated bladders down the street. And some, just a few, picked up a stick, dropped a ball, and tried to hit it. This is where golf began to sneak in. It wasn't called golf yet. Not really. The name would shift. Golf, goof, golf, soft little sounds whispered across the wind. But the game itself started to appear. In the hands of a soldier. In the fields behind a castle. On the rough paths behind a church. For the soldiers, it was a break from drills. When they weren't training or marching, they needed something to pass the time. Golf was quiet. No crowds. No shouting. Just the soft thwack of a ball and the clack of wood against stone. It didn't need skill. Not at first, just a bit of aim and a strong enough swing. For townsfolk, it was something different. A game that wasn't loud like football. A game that didn't need rules shouted across the field. You could play it in twos or threes. You didn't even need a winner. You just needed a stretch of land and enough light before sunset. Castles, with their courtyards and outer fields, were perfect places. Sometimes the servants played when the nobles weren't looking. Sometimes the guards did. Even the sons of lords might give it a try. The game moved slowly through the ranks. Not official, not approved, but always there. Back then, the idea of sports wasn't what it is now. Nobody wore numbers. There were no coaches, no sponsors, no crowds cheering from wooden stands. Play was personal, local, casual. You played because it filled a little gap in the day, because it made you feel human. But slowly, golf found more than gaps. It found fans. Someone would see it and want to try. Then someone else. Brother, a neighbor, a visiting merchant. The game didn't spread loudly. It crept. From castle to village. From soldier to child. From king's guard to baker's apprentice. And yet, even as it spread, it didn't grow in size. It stayed small, gentle. You wouldn't find 30 people playing golf at once. You'd find 2, maybe 4. Walking slowly, swinging lazily, and laughing when the ball rolled into a ditch. It was simple. A stick shaped just enough. A ball, maybe leather, maybe wood. A patch of ground. And something to aim for, a rock, a rabbit hole, a patch of grass that looked a little different. No holes marked with flags. No scorecards. Just people passing time. Sometimes nobles played too. The lines between classes were firm, but not in everything. If a game was fun, someone important might try it. And if they liked it, others might follow. It didn't matter who played it first. What mattered was who kept playing it. And people did. On foggy mornings. On quiet afternoons. Between duties and meals. After church or before a long walk home. Golf slipped into the routine of life without asking permission. So while kings signed letters and nobles rode horses through the fields, somewhere nearby, a man with a crooked stick lined up a shot. His friend squinted toward a stone in the distance. And in that moment, they weren't thinking about war or taxes or weather. They were thinking about the curve of the ground, the wind, the ball. That's how the game lived. Not with rules, but with rhythm. Not with cheers, but with quiet focus. Not in stadiums, but on patches of earth that belonged to no one. And even though it wasn't official, even though it had no name worth writing down, golf had already taken root. Among kings and castles, among soldiers and townsfolk. A game too soft to notice, but too steady to stop. That's the story of clubs, of sticks, of people just trying to enjoy the land beneath their feet, even if no one approved. Needed strong archers to keep up, to defend their towns, to scare off enemies, to win battles. But archery wasn't something you could learn in a day. It took years of practice, strength, focus, timing. And that meant one thing: everyone had to train. So the laws came. Not soft suggestions, not friendly reminders. Laws, serious ones. Young boys were expected to learn the bow. Towns had to provide places to practice. Men had to own bows and use them. Sunday afternoons weren't just for church. They were for target practice. It was everywhere. In the town square, you'd see targets. In the fields outside the village, you'd hear the twang of strings. Arrows flew past hay bales and wooden posts. Fathers taught sons. Friends competed to see who could hit the furthest mark. It became a habit, a duty, a quiet part of life. And it worked. Archers got better. The Scottish defense got stronger. People felt a little more secure knowing their neighbors could knock an arrow from 100 yards away. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't exciting. But it was necessary. That's why the government paid attention. They didn't want people slacking off. They didn't want distractions. And slowly, the kings started to worry, not just about enemies, but about how people were spending their time. Because something else had started to grow. A game? Golf. At first, it seemed harmless. A few men knocking a ball around in the fields. A game with sticks. Quiet, gentle. But then more people joined. Then a few more. Suddenly, on a day when they were supposed to be pulling back bowstrings, they were swinging clubs instead. That's when the concern started. To the king and his advisors, golf wasn't just a game. It was a problem. A threat to focus. A reason someone might skip archery practice. And when enough people skipped practice, the army got weaker. So they acted. In 1457, they passed a law. A strange one. It didn't just ban golf, it banned football too. It said these games were pulling men away from their duty, from their training, from what mattered most. The longbow. They weren't wrong. Archery took work. It wasn't easy to draw a heavy bow and aim straight. Muscles had to be trained. Eyes had to learn distance. If people chose fun over focus, the country could suffer. And in a time where battles could start any day, that was a big risk. So the message was clear: stop playing, start practicing. But that didn't mean everyone listened. Even with the law, some kept playing golf. Quietly, in the corners of fields, in alleys behind houses. Maybe only after they finished with their bows. Maybe instead of them. It's hard to know for sure. But it's easy to imagine someone sneaking a game after drills were done. The kings weren't happy. They issued more bans, stronger words. But the truth was, people liked golf. It was soft, calm. It didn't hurt your arms or blister your fingers. It didn't require perfect aim or thick calluses. It just needed time and a bit of space. Still, archery remained a focus. The military couldn't afford to fall behind. So the push continued. Practice more. Play less. Bows before balls. Duty over games. It might seem strict now, but back then it made sense. Scotland was in a rough spot. England was a constant worry. Local lords fought for power. Pirates roamed the coasts. Armies didn't just march once a year. They were a part of life. And that meant every man, young or old, needed to be ready. The longbow became more than a weapon. It became a symbol of responsibility, of readiness, of putting the country first. You could have your fun later, they said. Right now, pick up the bow. Even today, you can feel that old weight in the stories, in the records of laws, in the quiet fields where men once stood shoulder to shoulder, aiming at wooden posts, practicing, repeating, preparing. And yet, in the distance, behind a hill or beside a barn, someone was probably lining up a golf shot, swinging gently, hoping no one noticed. That's the tension that lived in those times, between duty and rest, between what was expected and what was fun. So when you hear about golf being banned, remember it wasn't because people hated fun. It was because people feared what might happen if fun came first. In the end, the bow won for a while. But golf? It waited, patiently, quietly, like a ball resting in the grass. Archery. Men were supposed to be training with longbows, practicing every week, getting stronger, hitting targets. That was the plan. That was the law. But more and more, it seemed like they were spending their free time doing something else, like kicking inflated bladders down streets, or swinging sticks at little leather balls. To James, this wasn't just play. It was a problem. So in 1457, he called Parliament together. They met, as they often did, to discuss laws, money, and defense. And out of that meeting came something small, but surprising, a ban. The Act of Parliament said, Item, it is decreed and ordained that the liegemen and subjects of the realm should not, in any way, practice the football and the golf under pain of punishment, and that archery be practiced in the same way as it was earlier in times past. Translated into simpler words, it meant this: stop playing football, stop playing golf, get back to archery, or else. The law didn't explain everything. It didn't list exact punishments or name names, but the message was clear. These games, especially golf, were seen as naughty sports, not because they were dangerous, but because they were a distraction. To the crown, it was serious. The kingdom needed strong archers, not playful golfers. War didn't wait for fun, so fun had to wait. Of course, this didn't stop people from enjoying the games, but for now, the law stood. What's interesting is how early this law appeared. In 1457, golf wasn't a sport with rules, trophies, or famous players. It was just something people did for fun. That's how strong its pull must have been, strong enough to get noticed, strong enough to be banned. And that word, naughty, sticks out. The records say golf was considered a naughty sport. Today, we hear that word and think of something light or silly. But back then, it meant something more. It meant improper, misguided, a poor choice in serious times. In other words, golf wasn't evil. It was just out of place. Imagine a soldier skipping practice to hit a ball across the field, or a group of men standing around, laughing softly, while war crept closer. It wasn't the game itself, it was the timing. The government feared what golf represented: comfort, distraction, idleness, things that didn't help defend a country. Still, golf didn't vanish. People played quietly, maybe behind homes, maybe in early mornings or just before dusk, maybe with one eye on the ball and one eye on the road in case a guard passed by. Because even when something is banned, it doesn't mean it disappears. It just goes quiet. The ban in 1457 wasn't the end of golf. It was the beginning of its strange journey, from outlawed pastime to national treasure. But back then, it was a rule. And it stayed that way for a while. James II was serious. And when kings are serious, their words carry weight, even if not everyone listens. Still, in between the strict laws and military worries, the image remains: someone, somewhere, lining up a shot, hitting a ball with a curved stick, smiling a little, then walking after it through the grass. Not because they were trying to rebel, but because it felt good. Because it was quiet. Because sometimes, even in tense times, people need a moment of calm. So yes, golf was banned. Written in law. Declared from the top. But it never really left. It just waited. Patiently. Softly. Like a ball resting in the rough, waiting for someone to come along with a club and try again. Place. Maybe they played early in the morning. Maybe just on certain streets. Or maybe some guards looked the other way. It's hard to know for sure. But one thing is clear: the game didn't disappear. It simply found quiet corners to hide in. And in those corners, it grew. Not fast, not loudly, but steadily. Kids saw it and wanted to try. Adults kept passing it down. Travelers brought it from one village to another. It wasn't organized, but it didn't need to be. The game had a rhythm, and the people liked it. Some made their own clubs, carved from sticks, shaped by hand. Others stitched balls together from scraps. It wasn't about having the best gear. It was about the feeling, the swing, the chase, the walk. And slowly, it became more than a game. It became part of life. Not everyone played, but most people knew someone who did. A cousin, a neighbor, a friend who swore they once hit the ball over a hill in one shot. The story started to spread. The game got passed along in pieces, and it started to belong to the people. Even the kings, despite the laws, must have known it was still being played. Maybe they didn't mind as much anymore. Maybe they had other things to worry about. Or maybe they played a few rounds themselves when no one was looking. Because there's something about golf that makes it easy to come back to. You don't need a team. You don't need a referee. You don't need anything fancy. Just time, a bit of land, and the quiet. That's what people held on to. They weren't trying to rebel. They weren't trying to make a point. They just liked the calm. The way the world slowed down when they stepped into the field. The way a simple swing could carry a ball and a bit of worry far away. So even though golf had been banned, it stayed alive. In the way someone might leave a club leaning by the door. In the way paths were worn into the grass. In the soft talk of someone asking, "Shall we go for a few swings?" It didn't need approval. It had tradition. By the late 1400s, it was becoming part of the local identity. Something small but steady. A thread in the fabric of the place. You could walk past a narrow alley or a sloped hill and know this is where people played. Even in bad weather. Even after long days. Even when the rules said not to. The game adapted. It made room for itself. It wasn't loud or demanding. That's what made it work. It fit into the spaces left behind by everything else. And in that way, it stayed. Generation after generation. Quietly, calmly, persistently. Because when something brings peace, even a little, people remember. They protect it. They pass it on. And golf, with its simple pace and soft rhythm, became one of those things. A secret game that everyone knew. A banned sport that never really stopped. A quiet habit in a loud world. Even today, you can feel it in places like Edinburgh. In the way the streets bend. In the names of old paths. In the fields just outside the city where people still swing clubs, just like they did centuries ago. Not because they have to, but because they want to. That's how golf survived the ban. Not with noise, not with protest, just by being something people didn't want to give up. Very Scottish way. Quiet shrug, quiet swing, a quiet return to the same fields they always played in. James III wasn't pleased, but there wasn't much he could do. You can't watch every village. You can't stand on every hillside. You can't peek behind every cottage. The game had roots now, and pulling them out wasn't going to be easy. Still, the ban stood. Then came James IV. Different king, a little more polished, a little more curious. But when he took the throne, he saw the same issue. Men still playing golf. Still kicking balls, still skipping archery. And so, in 1491, he did it again. Another law, another repeat of the ban. Golf and football were now double banned. Triple, if you count the original. The kings were determined. They weren't going to lose to a ball and stick. But here's the funny thing, they kind of already had. Because the more they banned it, the more it spread. Not because people were angry. Not because they wanted to fight the law, but because they liked the game. It was simple, gentle, a small bit of joy in a muddy world. The kings didn't understand. They saw golf as a threat, a naughty sport, a waste of time, a reason why armies might not be ready. But to the people, it wasn't that serious. It was something they played after work, after prayers, after everything else. It wasn't rebellion. It was relief. That's what made it so frustrating to the kings. This wasn't a loud challenge to authority. It was just people refusing to give up something they loved. Silently, steadily. You can picture it. A royal guard walking through a village, spotting a few men in the distance, swinging sticks, chasing a ball, then looking away. pretending not to notice. Because deep down, even the enforcers probably didn't care that much. The law said one thing, life said another. By the 1490s, the ban had become more of a formality, a symbol of royal frustration more than actual control. And that frustration ran deep. Imagine being a king, trying to build an army, trying to keep the borders safe. And every time you look away, someone's out there swinging a club. It must have felt like a joke. But it wasn't. It was just golf. A small, harmless habit that refused to die. The kings could sign laws, stamp seals, send messages, but they couldn't stop a game that had already become part of daily life. And in trying so hard, they gave the game more attention than ever. People heard the bans and thought, it must be fun if they're trying this hard, stop it. So they kept playing. In Edinburgh, in Perth, in villages by the sea, on fields where sheep grazed, in alleys behind bakeries, anywhere a ball could roll. And the game kept growing. Not in noise, not in size, but in meaning. It wasn't just about hitting a ball. It was about routine, friendship, the rhythm of something familiar. It felt like home. That's what the kings didn't see. They thought they were stopping a trend, but they were trying to erase a feeling. And that never works. So the bans came, and the bans stayed, written in books, passed by Parliament, spoken in castles. But in the real world, in the soft grass and the gray mornings, golf lived on. The people had made up their minds, and no amount of royal frustration could change that. Oh, sharing a smile. It was a game you felt as much as played. In towns like St. Andrews or Edinburgh, you might find it in the middle of everything. A side street, a market square, early in the morning, even behind the church, before service started. Wherever there was room, someone might be swinging. At first, it was mostly commoners, workers, apprentices, servants, people who didn't have gold or titles, but had a bit of time and a need for rest. Golf gave them something small to enjoy. They didn't need money for it. Just a bent stick, a homemade ball, and a bit of ground. It was the kind of game that belonged to everyone because anyone could play. And they did. Shoeless kids, old men with crooked backs, women between chores. It wasn't a sport yet. It was just normal, familiar, like bread baking or bells ringing. Something that felt like part of the place. But slowly, the elites noticed. Some nobles saw it during visits to the town. Others heard about it from servants. And as always happens, once something gets popular among regular folks, someone from the top wants to try it too. At first, it might have seemed odd lords with fancy cloaks trying to swing a club in the mud. But they had open land, courtyards, gardens, places where they could play more freely. So they did. Golf began to move up the ladder. It didn't change much. The basics stayed the same. A stick, a ball, a target. But now the game was being played in both castles and cottages, by both farmers and knights. It crossed the line between classes without asking permission. And that's part of what made it special. Most games were divided. Some were for the rich, some were for the poor. But golf didn't care. It fit itself into whatever space was available. It let people make it their own. In the streets, it was raw. Quick shots between barrels and chickens. Bounces off doorways. Laughter when the ball ended up in a bucket of water. In the fields, it was slower. Longer swings. Bigger goals. Walks between shots that gave people time to talk. To breathe. The soundscape was unique. No horns. No cheering crowds. Just soft things. The wooden tap of a swing. The thump of a ball hitting dirt, the shuffle of feet on gravel, and sometimes quiet voices telling jokes, sharing stories, or saying nothing at all. It was peaceful in a way most games weren't. Football was noisy. Wrestling had grunts and cheers. But golf was a whisper. A moment of calm in the middle of daily life. Even when it was banned, those sounds didn't stop. They just got quieter, more hidden. But if you listen closely in the right places, you'd still hear them. The streets and alleys remembered. They became part of the game. Their shapes, their corners, the way the ball rolled just a little differently depending on the slope. Every path was a course. Every player had their favorite spots. And over time, stories grew. Old John hit the ball past the baker's door in 2 strokes. Mary once chipped it over the trough without a splash. Little tales that made the game feel bigger, more real. That's how the game spread. Not through rule books or tournaments, but through sound, through memory, through the feeling of the club in your hand and the road under your feet. And while the elites might have polished it later, given it rules and boundaries, they didn't invent it. The streets did. The commoners did. They shaped it with every soft swing. So if you ever walk through an old Scottish town, look down. Notice the curve of the street, the way the buildings lean. Imagine a ball rolling through, slow and steady. A game being played, not for prizes, but for peace. That was golf. Not just a sport, a sound, a feeling, a habit in the heart of the street. Well, who was going to stop anyone else? It's strange to think a game that had been banned for nearly 50 years was suddenly allowed, just because a king decided to join in. But that's how things worked back then. Royal actions mattered more than royal words. And James IV liked golf. He didn't just try it once. He kept playing. The records show more purchases, more clubs, even balls. He had people craft them. He spent money on the game. That wasn't just curiosity. That was interest. And slowly, the game began to rise. Not because of rules, not because of laws, but because of example. If the king could play, then maybe the nobles could too. And if the nobles were playing, then the townspeople could keep playing without fear. The game was no longer sneaky. It was accepted, even if the law hadn't caught up yet. This was the turning point. For years, people had played in secret, in alleys, behind barns, on hills far from the town. Now they could play more openly. Maybe not loud, maybe not everywhere. But the fear was fading. It's funny how quiet change can be. There wasn't a royal announcement saying golf is now allowed. There was no ceremony, no public speech. Just one man, the most important man, choosing to swing a club and hit a ball. That was enough. And it said something powerful, that the game wasn't the enemy. It wasn't ruining the country. It wasn't stealing men from their duties. It was just a game, a good one that even a king could enjoy. Maybe James IV liked the walk, or the feel of the club in his hand. Maybe he liked the sound the ball made when it rolled over stone. Or maybe he just wanted a break from politics, letters, and meetings. Whatever the reason, he helped lift the weight off golf's shoulders. From that point on, the game began to settle in. It found its place. It wasn't hiding anymore. It was being played in gardens, in open fields, even inside the royal court. The ban wasn't officially erased, not yet, but it no longer had teeth. People saw what the king was doing, and they followed. It's one thing to read about this in a record book, a line about a few shillings spent on golf clubs. But when you picture it, really picture it, it means more. The king, in robes or maybe simpler clothes, standing in the grass, lifting a club, eyeing a ball, swinging softly, smiling a little, maybe laughing with a friend or a guard. That image tells you everything. It shows how small things can carry power, how quiet actions can undo loud laws, how the simple choice to play can open a door for everyone else. Before James IV, golf was something you did with caution. After him, it was something you could do with pride. The game didn't change overnight. It was still played with rough clubs and stitched balls, still played in fields, not on smooth lawns. But now it had support. It had visibility. It had a future. And it all started with one king and one game. Looking back, it's hard not to smile at the irony. The very rulers who once tried to stop golf ended up making it stronger. Their bans brought attention. Their frustration gave it charm, and when one of them finally joined in, it sealed the game's place in history. So yes, golf was once banned, but all it took was one swing from the top to start turning things around. And once the king played, the rest was just a matter of time. It started to feel like something cultural, something that belonged to Scotland, something woven into the rhythm of life. You could see it in the way people spoke. A casual mention of a morning round, a story about a ball that disappeared into a rabbit hole, gentle jokes about bad swings and long walks. The game had a language now, a quiet, shared understanding. In the Scottish Highlands, this shift became especially clear. The land was perfect for golf, rolling hills, wide fields, soft breezes. Nature had already drawn the courses. People just followed the lines. They didn't build much. They didn't change the earth. They played the land as it was. And in doing so, they created something special. The Highlands gave the game its character. Long stretches of grass, dips and rises that made every shot a guess. The wind wasn't a problem, it was part of the game. You learned to listen to it, to feel it on your neck before you swung. Golf wasn't flashy, it wasn't fast, but that's why people liked it. It slowed things down. It gave space for thought, for conversation, for silence. It became more than a sport. It became a ritual. Wake up early, grab her club, walk to the course, maybe alone, maybe with a friend. Hit a ball, follow it, repeat. Not for victory, not for fame, just because it felt good. This is how golf became iconic. Not through cheers and trophies, but through calm, through repetition, through the feeling of belonging to something older than yourself. Communities began to form around it. Not clubs with rules and fees, but loose groups of people who met in the same places, at the same times. They didn't need invitations, just a shared love for the game. Young people learned by watching. Elders shared tips, not with lectures, but by example. Better grip, a gentler swing, less force, more feel. Golf became a teacher, quiet, patient kind. Even the weather became part of the experience. Fog rolling in over the hills, light rain tapping on your shoulders, cold wind brushing across your cheeks. It didn't stop the game. It added to it, made it more real, more Scottish. The shift from outlawed to beloved didn't come with a celebration. No banner was raised. No law was repealed in song. It just happened through habit, through time. And soon the word golf no longer felt risky. It felt right. The king played. The nobles played. The people played. And everywhere it was played, it carried the same slow rhythm. Hit, walk, breathe, think, swing again. Some played better than others, but no one seemed to mind. The goal wasn't to win. The goal was to be there, to be part of it. In the Highlands, golf felt like home. It echoed the land, quiet, rugged, a little unpredictable. It asked for focus but gave back peace. It didn't need noise to be exciting. It didn't need crowds to feel important. That's what made it iconic. The game stayed close to its roots. It didn't ask for more than it gave, and people respected that. It became something you passed on, father to son, mother to daughter, neighbor to neighbor. A slow game, but a steady one that matched the pace of life in a place where things didn't rush. So when people say golf is part of Scotland, this is what they mean. They don't just mean the history, or the records, or the old courses. They mean the feeling, the way the game grew into the land, the way it stayed soft, even when kings tried to strike it down. From illicit to iconic, from banned to beloved. That's the story of golf in Scotland. And it all started with quiet swings in quiet places, and a king who saw something good in a simple game. Andrews, a small town on the coast. Windy, quiet, surrounded by dunes and wide open land. There, the game took root in a way that was different. Not just people playing in any field, but people returning again and again to the same stretch of ground. That land became the old course. It didn't look like today's courses. There were no tee boxes, no printed yardage signs, no manicured greens. Just grass, some short, some long. Natural dips. Small bunkers made by animals or weather. But the game loved it. And the players came back. St. Andrews didn't build golf, but it gave it space to grow. The land did most of the work. It was already shaped for challenge. Slopes here, flat runs there, patches of hard sand. The sea nearby, always adding wind and salt to the air. You couldn't plan a better place. It was natural. The players simply adapted. They didn't fight the land. They played with it. If the grass was rough, they aimed differently. If the wind was strong, they swung slower. The course taught the game just as much as the game shaped the course. That's the beauty of early golf courses. They weren't designed. They were discovered. And because of that, each one felt different. In one village, a course might stretch across farmland. In another, it might wind through dunes. Some holes were long. Some were short. Some had no holes at all, just markers. But the idea was the same. A route, a rhythm, a path through the land. People began to talk about holes, stopping points in the course, goals, landmarks. You'd hit toward one, then another. Not randomly, but with quiet intention. That's how the early courses took shape. Not from blueprints, but from footsteps. You can imagine it. A few people walking the same paths every week, hitting the ball, finding better routes, shortcuts, challenges, slowly agreeing without saying much. This is the way to play, and soon others followed. Golf courses became part of the community. People knew where they were, even if there were no fences. Children learned the curves. Elders remembered where someone once hit a perfect shot. It was local memory, built into the ground. At St. Andrews, that memory grew deeper. More people came, some from nearby towns, some from farther away. They heard about the course, the sea air, the grass that seemed made for golf, and they wanted to see it for themselves. It wasn't famous yet, but it was known for feeling right. And once people had a place like that, they wanted to protect it. They started to care more about the ground. They watched where they stepped. They talked about keeping the course nice. Even without fancy rules, there was respect. The land was part of the game now. It wasn't just a place to play. It was the game itself. And that was new. Because before, golf had just fit into whatever space was left over. But now it had space made for it. It had a home. The courses grew slowly. They didn't need much. Just space, time, and care. And they brought something with them, a sense of peace. Walking the course became a quiet ritual. You didn't run. You strolled. You watched the sky. You listened to the wind. You noticed the earth beneath your feet. Golf wasn't just about the ball anymore. It was about the walk between shots. The course gave the game its rhythm. Hit, walk, think, repeat. That rhythm matched life in Scotland. Calm, thoughtful, a little rough around the edges, but full of charm. So even as golf began to spread, it carried that feeling with it. Courses in other places looked different, but they always tried to copy the heart of it, the feeling of the land at St. Andrews. It wasn't about control. It was about connection. That's what early golf courses offered. A chance to feel close to the earth, to play with the wind, not against it, to let the bumps and curves shape your choices, from the streets to the fields. From alleys to wide dunes, golf found its way. And with each quiet step, the course became more than ground. It became part of the story of how a simple game found its place in the world, not by force, but by fitting in. That was part of the charm. You didn't chase perfection. You chased the ball. And then there were the balls. Early golf balls weren't plastic or rubber. They were often made from leather, stuffed with feathers. That's right, feathers. Goose feathers, mostly. The feathers were boiled, softened, and packed tight into the leather shell while both were still wet. Then they dried, shrank, and hardened into a tight, round shape. They were called featheries. Making one took time. It wasn't cheap. So losing a ball was a big deal. People searched ditches, puddles, even sheep pens just to find a wayward shot. Some used cheaper balls, made from wood or rags, but they didn't fly the same. They were heavier, less predictable. Still, every player had something to hit, even if it wasn't perfect. Now imagine the player. Medieval golfers didn't wear polos or golf shoes. They wore what they always wore: thick wool cloaks, tunics, trousers that clung in the rain, boots with laces that stayed muddy for days, hats when they had them, scarves if it was cold. Fashion wasn't a focus. Comfort wasn't either. The game fit into life, not the other way around. But even in all that rough clothing, a kind of style began to form. Some players carried their clubs with a little flair. Some had a favorite hat for golf days. Some tied their cloaks tighter so they could swing without tripping. Tiny choices, quiet habits, nothing bold. But over time, they added up. People began to notice not just the game, but the way people looked while playing it. The way they walked the course, the way they leaned on their clubs, even when they weren't swinging. It wasn't fashion exactly, but it was the beginning of something close. Golf started to have a look. A muddy boot, a worn cloak, a cap pulled low against the wind. These weren't fancy outfits, but they became part of the scene. If you saw someone walking with a curved stick, squinting into the distance, you knew what they were doing, even if they never said a word. And the equipment followed. Clubs got better, more balanced. Some makers started to shape them with more care. They added small touches: leather grips, metal tips, smoother wood. Balls got better too. More feathers, tighter leather, painted lines so they could be found more easily. Bit by bit, golf began to feel more like a real sport. But it never got loud. Even as the gear improved, even as people cared more about how they looked, the game stayed quiet. Simple, slow. The style didn't shout. It whispered. And that suited the game just fine. People didn't play golf to show off. They played because it made them feel something. The soft rhythm, the calm, the way the world narrowed down to just you, the club, and the next shot. Style came from that feeling. Not from trends or rules, but from the way the game fit into life. Quiet confidence, a love for the land, a respect for the moment. Even today, you can see pieces of that old style. In the way players pause before a swing, in the way they carry their bags, in the simple colors, the quiet shoes, the calm clothes. Modern golf has changed, but the roots are still there. In the carved clubs, in the feather-filled balls, in the muddy boots that once walked the hills of Scotland, searching for a better lie. That's the story of golf's early gear. Not flashy, not fast, but full of feeling. A game shaped by the tools people had, and the clothes they wore, and the way they moved through the world, one swing at a time. Like much. But to the church, it felt wrong. Sermons were given. Warnings were spoken. Priests and ministers reminded people that Sunday was for the soul, not for sport. Playing games, they said, was a kind of idleness, a waste of holy time. And golf, for all its silence and calm, was still a game. Some churches even posted public notices. No games on the Sabbath. No football. No dice. No golf. The lists varied, but the message stayed the same. Sunday was not for fun. To some people, this felt like too much. They had already worked 6 days. Golf was hardly sinful. It wasn't loud or wild. It was peaceful. But still, many listened. Not because they agreed, but because that's what people did back then. The church wasn't something you argued with. But people are people. And golf had a way of sticking around. Instead of quitting, players made adjustments. Some waited until the sun was low, after prayers, after meals, when the village was quiet. Others played away from the town, far enough from the chapel that no one would notice. A few played early, before the bells rang. Some even pretended they were just walking. Slowly, a balance started to form. Church in the morning, golf in the late afternoon. Not official, not spoken, but understood. A kind of unspoken peace between faith and fun. This peace didn't come from argument. It came from rhythm. People still believed, still prayed, still sat quietly on wooden benches and listened to the words. But they also found comfort in the slow arc of a swing, in the quiet roll of a ball, in the feel of the grass underfoot. And maybe that wasn't so different. Both acts, worship and golf, asked for attention, for stillness, for focus. Maybe not the same kind, but a kind nonetheless. Some clergy began to soften. They saw that golf wasn't a noisy sin. It didn't pull people into chaos. It didn't make them forget who they were. In fact, it often brought people together, gently, quietly, like a hymn on the wind. And when something brings peace, even in small ways, it's hard to fight it forever. Over time, the sermons changed. The warnings faded. Sunday still belonged to the church, but there was room now, small room, for something else. Something simple. Something slow. Golf. The game didn't push its way in. It just waited, like it always had. And eventually, it found a place. That's how golf made peace with the Sabbath. Not by changing itself, not by shouting back, but by being what it was, quiet, steady, calm. Even now, in old Scottish towns, you can see the pattern. Bells in the morning, swings in the afternoon, a soft balance between spirit and sport. The church never truly embraced golf, but it stopped fighting it. And that was enough, because golf didn't want to win. It just wanted to stay. And in the slow rhythms of Sunday, the prayers, the meals, the soft evening light, it found a way to belong. That's how golf survived another test. Not with pride, but with patience. Pretending to plant something. Of men who kept a stick by the back door, just in case. Of women who marked small goals with stones and played quietly while the stew simmered. It wasn't about breaking the law. It was about holding on to something that made them feel human. Because life was hard. Long days of work. Cold homes. Rules that pressed down. But golf gave a bit of lightness. A reason to breathe. To laugh, even just a little. In that way, it became more than a game. It became a statement. Come one. I still have this. You can't take it. And that was enough. The game didn't need banners or speeches. It didn't need leaders. Just people, tired, quiet, determined, refusing to let go of something good. That's why it lasted. Through bans, through frowns, through silence. It grew in secret, passed down like a quiet song, taught with a wink, played with soft steps and careful eyes. Each swing was simple, but behind it was something deeper. A choice to hold on, to continue, to not let the weight of rules take everything away. In that way, golf was a gentle kind of rebellion. One that didn't hurt anyone. One that brought people together, not apart. A slow answer to a fast world. It didn't try to win. It just tried to survive. And it did. Because people don't always need big reasons to resist. Sometimes they just need a small one. A moment of joy. A memory. A game that reminds them of who they are. Golf was that moment. And so, even as it was banned again and again, people kept swinging, kept walking the same paths, kept carving clubs in the shed and stuffing feathers into leather balls. They didn't need an audience. They didn't need applause. They just needed the game. And every time they played, they said quietly, I still choose this. That's the calming power of a forbidden pastime. It reminds you that even in strict times, even in gray days, there's still space for joy, for movement, for play. That's what golf gave, and that's why it stayed. Golf had become part of the rhythm of life, not because someone allowed it, but because people had never let it go. The band, once so serious, had grown quiet. There were no parades to celebrate, no royal scrolls announcing, "You may now golf." It didn't happen that way. It just faded. People forgot the law was even there. That's how some rules die. Not with a bang, but with a yawn. It's easy to imagine a young player in 1540 walking out to the fields, swinging freely, never knowing that 100 years earlier, that same swing could have gotten him punished. The ban meant nothing now. It was old paper. And the game? It had grown roots. At places like St. Andrews, golf wasn't just played, it was expected. Travelers came to see it, to try it, to walk the same windswept ground. They didn't talk about bands. They talked about shots, about wind, about the way the grass curved. The game had moved on. Not upward, not faster, just deeper. More woven into the land. More part of the people. Nobody missed the band. Nobody wanted it back. It belonged to a time that had passed. A time when kings feared distractions. When archery was life. When quiet fun was seen as a threat. That world was gone. And in its place stood a game that had outlasted fear. Not by fighting, just by staying. There's something soft about that. Something easy to miss. Golf didn't win with power. It won with patience. With repetition. With quiet joy that didn't need permission. And maybe that's why people kept playing. Because it reminded them that some things, simple, good things, can outlast even the strongest rules. The band became a story. Something to laugh about. Did you know this game used to be illegal? People smiled, shook their heads, then went back to playing. The game had changed, but not that much. Still slow. Still calm. Still better with friends and open skies. And still full of that same quiet spirit. The kind that doesn't shout or run. The kind that walks, swings, waits. Laws may rise and fall. Kings may come and go. But some things, the feel of a club in your hand, the sound of a ball rolling through grass, those things stick. That's how golf forgot the band. And how the world did too. Not because it was a race, but because it no longer mattered. The game had written a new story, one swing at a time. Respect for the land. The soft clack of a swing on a chilly day. The game that was once banned became a symbol, not just of sport, but of peace. It's strange, really, to think of golf that way. But that's what it became for many people. A pause in a busy week, a walk with a friend, a chance to be still even while moving. In a world that often runs too fast, golf reminds us to slow down. And maybe that's why it spread. Not because of fame or money, but because it filled something simple in the human heart. A need to wander, then to try again. Scotland didn't keep it for itself. It shared it in its own quiet way. Sailors brought it to new shores. Travelers carried clubs in wagons and ships. Soldiers played it between battles. Businessmen played it between meetings. It grew in cities and in far-off villages, on beaches, in deserts, on hills. And yet, no matter where it goes, it still sounds the same. That same soft swing, that same rolling ball, that same long walk toward the next shot. People add their own rules, their own clothes, their own courses. But the heart of it, the slow, thoughtful rhythm, that stays the same. That stays Scottish. Even modern players, with perfect grass and digital scorecards, still tip their hats to where it all began. They know. They remember. Or at least they feel it. That sleepy spirit. That calm history. That old game that never needed to be loud to be loved. And the story behind it, the bands, the secret games, the kings who played, the churches that frowned, the fields that remembered, it all adds to the weight, to the wonder. Because golf didn't rise by force. It rose by staying, by waiting, by being something that people didn't want to lose. And now when someone in Canada or South Korea steps up to swing, they're part of that. part of a long, soft chain of people who chose to play something quiet. That's what makes it special. Not the trophies, not the records, but the feeling of belonging to the land, to the moment, to the swing. Scotland gave us that, not with a shout, but with a whisper. A game that once caused worry now brings rest. A sport once banned now brings people together. Not bad for a ball and a stick. So as we finish this sleepy journey, maybe picture it one last time. Green hill, cloudy sky, a small group of people walking slowly, talking gently, swinging sometimes, laughing quietly. No rush, no pressure, just time and space and peace. That's golf. That's Scotland. And that's the gift.